She was 32 weeks pregnant, lying in a hospital bed, hooked to a monitor, watching her daughter's heartbeat on the screen. 144,
I truly believe
144,
this partnership will elevate the
144.
entire
Her
department.
husband walked in. He did not ask how she was feeling. He did not look at the monitor. He
Just
asked
sign
about
right
a
here,
file,
Claire. It's the
a
final
business
step.
file. She gave him the answer. He said she was wrong. She said she wasn't. And then
It's okay,
the
sweetheart.
slap came from the left side.
I'm here now.
Sharp, fast. The sound of
Everything
an
is going
open
to be all
hand
right.
against a woman's face in a hospital room where she was supposed to be safe. She sat there. Her hand went slowly to her cheek. The monitor kept counting. 144, 144. Her unborn daughter's heartbeat, steady and unknowing. Her husband adjusted his cufflinks and walked out. She picked up her phone with shaking hands. She called 4 words to her father. Dad, come right now. What happened in the next 48 hours did not just end a marriage. It brought down a billion-dollar company. Because the man who slapped his pregnant wife in a hospital room forgot one thing. One critical, catastrophic thing. Her father had been waiting for a reason. And now he had one. Stay with Claire. Because what she discovers about the 2 years before that slap is far more devastating than the slap itself. And what she builds after, that is the part that will stay with you. Lesson statement. Before we begin, this story is for every woman who has ever made herself smaller to make someone else comfortable, who has ever explained away the signs, who has ever waited for the version of someone to come back that perhaps was never really there. This story is proof that losing the wrong life is not a loss. It is a beginning. If this story moves you, if even one moment feels like something you have lived or witnessed or carried quietly, please like this video and leave a comment below. Tell us which part hit hardest. Your words reach other women who need to know they are not alone. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are new here, subscribe and stay, because every story on this channel is built for women who are ready to stop being quiet about the things that matter. You are exactly why we do this.
The heart monitor beeped, steady, rhythmic, patient. It did not care about anything happening in room 412 of Mercy General Medical Center. It only counted 144, 144, 144. Claire Whitfield Ashford was 32 weeks pregnant. She lay in a hospital bed wearing a paper gown that crinkled every time she shifted her weight. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose knot. There were shadows under her eyes from 3 nights of interrupted sleep and elevated blood pressure, readings, and the specific exhaustion of a body doing 2 people's work at once. The maternity floor nurses had been kind. They remembered her name without checking the chart. They brought extra pillows without being asked. Nurse Dorothy Merritt had spent 20 minutes the night before just sitting with her, not talking, while the monitoring equipment ran its quiet checks. The fluorescent overhead light was less kind. It buzzed faintly and made everything look slightly more clinical than it needed to. Claire was watching the monitor above her bed, the one tracking her daughter's heartbeat, 144 beats per minute, steady and strong and indifferent to the rest of it. She had been watching it for 20 minutes when the door opened. Brennan Ashford came in without knocking. He was 38 years old and stood 6 feet 2 inches and wore a dark charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His tie was still knotted perfectly. His cufflinks caught the fluorescent light. He had come from the office. He had not stopped to change or to prepare any particular expression for this room. He did not say hello. He did not ask how she was feeling. He set his phone on the bedside table, looked at the monitoring equipment with a brief, assessing glance, and said, "Where are the Delacroix files?" Not a question. The way he said most things. As a statement that expected compliance, Claire looked at him for a moment. "Brennan," she said softly, "I'm on bed rest. My blood pressure has been—" "I know you're on bed rest," he said. "I'm asking about the files. Warren said they weren't in the shared drive. They're in the cloud folder. Delacroix Q4. The subfolder marked final drafts." "That's not what Warren told me. Warren is wrong. The room changed, not loudly, not with any particular visible shift, but something in the air tightened. The way air tightens before weather comes. Brennan looked at her. "Do not call my CFO wrong," he said. His voice was very quiet. The kind of quiet that is louder than raised voices, because it means the person speaking has decided not to waste energy on volume. "Brennan, I built that filing system. I know exactly where—" "Claire." She stopped. He looked at the monitor, at the number, 144. Then he looked back at her with the expression she had learned, over 4 years, to recognize. The expression that meant he was calculating something, what could be said, what could be controlled, what the situation required of him. "You embarrassed me," he said, "in front of the board, yesterday when you called in and contradicted the Delacroix projections. That was not appropriate. The projections were wrong. I was correcting. You were not asked to correct anything. You were not in the room. You called in from a hospital bed and argued with my financial team in front of our partners, because they were about to present numbers that didn't. That is not your job anymore." The silence after that was specific, dense, the kind that has weight. Claire looked at the monitor. 144, 144. She breathed. "You're right," she said, and she hated herself a little for saying it. "I should have waited and talked to you privately. I'm sorry." She watched him recalibrate, watched the tightness in his jaw ease slightly. This was the way it worked. She gave ground. He accepted it. The temperature dropped. The day continued. Except today it did not work that way. "The board is asking questions about your involvement in the company," he said, "about your judgment, about whether having you on internal communications while you're in this condition is—" "This condition," she repeated. "Claire, I am 32 weeks pregnant with your daughter," she said. "That is not a condition. That is a—" "I am trying to explain to you," he said, and his voice dropped further, into that lowest register, the one that meant the conversation was over as far as he was concerned, "that your behavior is creating problems. Problems I have to manage, on top of everything else I am managing right now." She thought, "I should stop. I should let this go. I should wait until he is calmer and bring it up then." She had thought these things many times. She thought them again now, from a hospital bed, 32 weeks pregnant, with a blood pressure reading that her doctor had described as concerning. She said, "Warren is wrong about the file location. The documents are in the Q4 subfolder. I can tell him exactly where." The slap came from the left side. It was not a punch. It was not a shove. It was an open palm, moving fast, connecting with her left cheek with a sound that was somehow both sharp and flat at the same time. The way a hand connects when it moves through air that did not expect it. It was not the kind of strike meant to injure. It was the kind meant to stop, to silence, to remind. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. The heart monitor did not change its count. 144, 144, 144. Claire's hand went to her face, slowly, the way hands move when the mind has not yet processed what the body already knows. Her fingers touched the heat rising in her cheek. She pressed gently, as if checking whether it was real. It was real. It was some seal. Brennan stood at the foot of the bed, adjusting his cufflinks. He adjusted them with the same focused, precise attention he gave everything. Small clockwise rotation on the left. Check the right. Satisfied. The door opened. Dorothy Merritt came in carrying a blood pressure cuff and a tablet with the afternoon monitoring schedule. She was 31 years old and had been a maternity floor nurse for 7 years. She had walked into many kinds of rooms. She had developed a rapid professional ability to read a room's geometry in the first 2 seconds. She read this one. Her face did a specific thing, a complete, total freeze, followed by a recalibration so fast and so thorough that someone watching from outside might have missed it entirely. "Mr. Ashford," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. "I need to take Mrs. Ashford's vitals." Brennan looked at the nurse, then at Claire. Then he picked up his phone from the bedside table. He tucked it into his breast pocket. He walked to the door, opened it, and left without a word. His shoes were quiet on the linoleum. The door swung shut. Dorothy crossed the room in 4 steps. She did not say anything. She sat on the edge of the bed. She wrapped the cuff around Claire's arm with practiced, gentle hands. She pressed the button. She waited. The machine beeped. 178/112. Dorothy looked at the number. She looked at Claire. She set the tablet down on the bedside table. She said, very quietly, "Do you want me to call someone?" Claire stared at the wall. The fluorescent light hummed. The monitor counted. The baby moved inside her. A slow, rolling turn, the way her daughter moved when she was comfortable, unhurried, entirely unaware that anything in the world outside her had changed. Claire thought, I knew. Somewhere inside me, I knew it would come to this. She thought, I just didn't think it would happen here. She thought, I am 32 weeks pregnant in a hospital bed, and my husband just hit me and walked out adjusting his cufflinks. She said, "Call my father." Douglas Hartwell was 61 years old. He had built Hartwell Capital from a regional investment firm into one of the most respected private capital operations on the East Coast. He had done this over 22 years through a combination of accurate assessment, patience, and the willingness to move decisively when the moment required it. He was in a board meeting downtown, 7 blocks from Mercy General, when his phone lit up with his daughter's name. He picked up on the second ring. Claire said 4 words. "Dad, come right now." Douglas Hartwell said, "I'm already walking." He was already walking. He ended the call, set his phone in his breast pocket, nodded to the board chair, and walked out of the meeting without explanation. He took the stairs. He came out onto the sidewalk, moving at the outer edge of what walking could mean. 7 blocks, 11 minutes. He arrived with his coat still on, and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, forgotten there since the meeting. He came through the door of room 412 and stopped. He saw his daughter's face, the redness already deepening on her left cheek, the hand still pressed lightly against it, the careful, controlled expression of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of decision. He crossed the room in 4 steps. He sat in the plastic chair beside her bed. He took both her hands in his. His hands were large and warm. She remembered being 5 years old and completely certain that nothing truly bad could happen while her father was holding her hands. She was not 5 years old, but she held on. "Tell me what happened," he said. His voice was calm. The specific calm that requires enormous effort to produce. The calm of someone who has decided that what his daughter needs right now is steadiness. And so steadiness is what she will get, regardless of what it costs him. She told him the files, the cufflinks, the register of voice she had learned to fear, the 3 seconds of nothing, her hand going slowly to her face. When she finished, Douglas was quiet. The monitor counted 144, 144. "Has he done this before?" Douglas asked. Claire's silence answered the question. "Not like this," she said. She was still watching the monitor, the 144 steady pulse of her daughter. Not. He never. It was always the other things. Douglas did not push. He waited with the patience of a man who had spent 61 years understanding that the most important information rarely arrives when you demand it. And then it came, not in order. Not as a tidy account, as a flood. The kind of flood that happens when the last brick in a long, maintained wall gives way, and everything held behind it rushes forward with no regard for sequence or gentleness. The phone. First year of marriage. She had woken at 2 a.m. and reached for the glass of water on the nightstand and found Brennan sitting up in the dim light, her phone in his hand, scrolling through her messages with the calm, methodical focus of someone completing a task. She had sat up. He had looked at her. He had not been embarrassed. He had not been startled. He had simply looked at her with that neutral, assessing expression and said, "You shouldn't leave your phone unlocked." As if it was advice. As if she had asked for it. She had not known what to say. So she had said nothing. And the silence had closed over the moment like water over a stone, and they had both lain back down, and in the morning it was as if it had not happened at all. She had told herself it was insecurity from his first marriage. She had told herself she understood him in ways others did not. She had told herself that understanding someone's damage was the same as accepting it, and that acceptance was the same as love. She had been wrong about all three. The dinner party, 2 years in, the Ashford estate in Newton, 18 people around a long mahogany table, the third course. She had made a comment about commercial real estate trends in the Northeast Corridor, her actual area of expertise, her career before she transitioned into Ashford Group's internal operations at Brennan's strong suggestion, which had been framed as an opportunity and had felt, at the time, like being chosen. She had made an accurate, interesting observation. Brennan had laughed. Not a small laugh, not a surprised laugh, a deliberate, full turning to the table laugh. The kind engineered to be witnessed. He had said, "Claire reads a lot of articles." And then he had continued the conversation as if she had not spoken. 18 people at the table. She had smiled. She had reached for her wine glass. She had not said another word about real estate that evening. She had not said much else at all. The pregnancy announcement. She had decorated their bedroom with small, soft lights. A single handwritten card on the pillow. "We're having a baby." She had spent an hour choosing the right words. She had been trembling with the good kind of nervous, the kind that comes from wanting to give someone something precious. He had come home. He had read the card. He had looked at her. He had said, "I hope this doesn't affect the Delacroix timeline." Then he had kissed her forehead and gone back to his laptop. She had stood in the decorated room for a long time afterward, the small lights still on, the card still on the pillow. She had assembled an explanation. "He processes things differently. He will come around. I am being too sensitive. He loves me in ways he doesn't know how to express." She had constructed a fleet of explanations and sailed away on them, and she had not looked back at the shore she was leaving. "Dad," she said slowly. Douglas waited. "I think I knew. I think somewhere inside me. I always knew something was wrong." She paused. "I kept waiting for the version of him I married to come back." Douglas said, "Was he ever that version?" The question landed like a stone in still water. The ripples moved outward and did not stop. She did not answer immediately. Because the honest answer, the one she was arriving at, for the first time in full daylight, was this. She did not know. She had been so focused on waiting for a man to return that she had never quite confirmed whether he had ever been there to begin with. God, I was so stupid, she thought. The signs were all there. Douglas did not say she was not stupid. He was too intelligent and too honest to offer that particular comfort, which would have required her to argue against it, which would have been its own exhaustion. He held her hands. Outside the room, in the corridor, Dorothy Merritt was at the nurse's station. She was completing the incident report that hospital protocol required Whenever there was reason to believe a patient had experienced physical harm, she was thorough. She noted the time, 2:17 in the afternoon. She noted the circumstances, the visible redness on the patient's left cheek, the blood pressure reading of 178 over 112, the presence of the patient's husband at the time of the nurse's arrival, his departure immediately following. She noted the security camera, positioned in the hallway, the one whose angle she had observed over 7 years of working this corridor, captured a partial view through the small interior window of room 412. She flagged the report for Dr. Patricia Odom. She pressed submit. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she stood up and went back to work. Because that was what you did. And because the things that felt like not enough were sometimes the things that mattered most. Margot Sills arrived 43 minutes after Douglas. She was 31 years old, sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal, and drove the way she did most things, fast and with complete confidence in her own judgment and occasional alarm to other road users. She had gotten a call from Douglas on his way from the parking garage. The call had lasted 45 seconds. She came through the door of room 412 and stopped. She looked at Claire's face, at the fading redness still visible on her left cheek, at the careful architectural composure Claire was maintaining, at the way Claire was holding her body in the hospital bed, very still, as if stillness was the only way to keep everything from moving too fast. Margot set her bag down on the floor. She said, very quietly, "I have been biting my tongue for 3.5 years. Claire looked at her. "I know. I'm not biting it anymore." "I know that too." Margot sat down on the edge of the bed, not in the chair. On the actual bed, the way she had sat on Claire's dorm room bed in Boston University's Harrington Hall 13 years ago when they were 19 and the world was still mostly full of things that had not happened yet. She did not immediately embrace her. She just sat, present, certain, without performance. After a moment, Claire leaned her head on Margot's shoulder. The monitor counted. 144, 144. In the hallway, Douglas stepped away from the door. He took out his phone. He dialed from memory. The line picked up on the first ring. "Arthur?" Douglas said. His voice had changed. It was not louder. It was denser. The quality of a material, under pressure, more itself, harder, more permanent. "Cancel everything you have today. I need you at Mercy General Medical Center, 4th floor. And when you come, bring the Ashford prenuptial file. The full file. Everything." Arthur Kane said, "How bad?" "He struck my daughter in her hospital room. She is 32 weeks pregnant." A silence of 3 seconds. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Arthur said. And Douglas, "Yes. I'll call Henderson at the exchange." Douglas exhaled. The exhale contained relief and cold certainty and something final. "Thank you," he said. He ended the call. He stood in the maternity floor corridor with the sounds of the ward around him, soft shoes on linoleum, a call button chiming, distant voices, somewhere down the hall a newborn's first announcement of itself to the world. And he allowed himself 30 seconds. He felt everything he was not going to allow himself to feel in front of his daughter. Then he put it away. He straightened his coat. He went back in. Arthur Kane arrived in 18 minutes. He was 52 years old, silver-haired, and carried himself with the specific economy of a man who had spent 30 years in high-stakes legal rooms and learned that the least movement frequently conveyed the most authority. He set his leather briefcase on the window ledge. He set a manila folder beside it. He greeted Douglas with a look that conveyed everything and nothing. He greeted Claire with the quiet, direct warmth of someone who had known her since she was 12 years old and was not going to pretend this was an ordinary afternoon. He did not open the folder immediately. "Before I show you this," he said, "I want to explain how I have it." Douglas had commissioned a routine quarterly review of Claire's prenuptial agreement 6 weeks earlier. He had done this quietly, without mentioning it to Claire, because she had said something at a family dinner in October. Almost in passing, between courses, the way people mention the things that are actually frightening them, that the prenuptial agreement had recently come up again, that Brennan had asked her to sign something he described as a clarifying amendment. She had mentioned it once and not returned to it. Douglas had returned to it in private. Arthur opened the folder, the prenuptial agreement Claire had signed 4 years ago, the one her own attorney had reviewed, the one she had signed in good faith on a bright Thursday afternoon, with her whole life feeling, for the first time, like it was genuinely beginning, had been amended, once, 18 months ago. The signature on page 7 was hers. She recognized it instantly. The particular slope of the C, the way the W connected to the H. Her own handwriting, confident and clear, on a document she had been told was a routine insurance update for the quarterly financial review. She remembered the morning she had signed it. She had been coming off 3 days of severe morning sickness. She had barely been able to sit upright. Brennan had brought the papers to the kitchen table, along with a glass of water and 2 crackers. He had said her regular attorney had already reviewed the revisions. He had said the financial advisor needed it before the end of the quarter. He had said it was nothing that required her to read the whole thing again. She had signed where he pointed. She had trusted him. "The amendment," Arthur said carefully, "strips you of any claim to Ashford Group shares in the event of voluntary separation. It reduces your settlement to a fixed amount described in the language as equivalent to 2 years of household management contribution." He named the number. Claire stared at it. "It also restructures the definition of marital assets," Arthur continued, "in a way that excludes several investment accounts opened jointly after the wedding, accounts that, under the original prenuptial terms, would be considered shared property." The room was very still. Margot, on the chair by the window, was not moving. Douglas was looking at the street below. "He planned this," Claire said. Not a question, not an accusation delivered with heat. A statement, flat and certain, the statement of someone who has arrived at a conclusion and is simply saying it out loud for the first time. "The timing of the amendment," Arthur said, "combined with a change to his life insurance beneficiary that I discovered this morning, which also removed you approximately 6 months ago, suggests a deliberate pattern. Financial restructuring in anticipation of separation." "He planned this," Claire said again. Her voice had not changed volume. It had changed quality. The way water changes quality when it goes from moving to still. Arthur said, "The good news is, the amendment may not hold. You signed under conditions that could constitute misrepresentation of document content. The claim that your attorney had reviewed the revisions is false. I spoke with your original attorney this morning. She has no record of seeing this document. She was never contacted." He paused. "Additionally, your father's financial records show that a substantial portion of Ashford Group's Series B capital was backstopped by Hartwell Capital 7 years ago, before your marriage. That leverage exists." Douglas said from the window, "The leverage isn't the point." "I know," Arthur said. "Tell me what you need from me. 48 hours, access to Henderson at the exchange, and Claire's authorization to proceed." Both men looked at her. She was holding the document. Page 7. Her own signature at the bottom, written on a morning when she had been sick and grateful and trusting and trying so hard to be the kind of wife who did not add to her husband's stress. She set the document down. "You have my authorization," she said. Arthur nodded once. He closed the folder. He moved toward the door. "Arthur," Claire said. He stopped. "The amendment, the insurance, the accounts." She paused. "How long has he been planning this?" Arthur was quiet for a moment. "Based on the documentation," he said, "approximately 2 years." She nodded once. He left. Margot waited until the door closed completely. Then she said, with the careful precision of someone choosing every word, "Claire." "I know," Claire said. "I just want to say, I know Margot." Margot reached across and took her hand and held it and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying right now, and she understood this. Douglas came away from the window. He sat in the chair beside the bed. He put his hand over both of theirs, and they sat together, the three of them, while the monitor continued its count and the afternoon light moved across the wall. Claire looked at the folder on the window ledge. 2 years, she thought. 2 years of sharing a bed, a table, a life, with a man who had already decided to leave and was waiting for the most advantageous moment. 2 years of her believing she was building something while he was quietly dismantling it. 2 years of her making herself smaller and more accommodating and calling it partnership. I disappeared, she thought. Over 4 years, I made myself smaller and quieter and more careful, and I called it love. And it was not love. I helped him do it, and I told myself I was being a good wife. This was not self-blame. She knew the difference between self-blame and recognition. She had crossed to the right side of that difference somewhere in the last 30 minutes, and she intended to stay there. The baby moved, a long, slow roll from the inside. The kind of movement that said, "Still here, both of us, still here." Claire put her hand on her belly. "I know," she said quietly. "We're going to be okay." She was not certain of this yet, but she said it out loud because she understood somewhere deep in herself that some truths need to be spoken before they can become real. For 4 minutes after that, she sat alone. Douglas had stepped out to take a call. Margot had gone to find coffee. Dr. Patricia Odom had been in, briefly, reviewed the monitoring strip, and left with the careful, neutral expression of a professional who understood more than she could say in an official capacity. The room was quiet. The monitor beeped. The hallway sounds filtered in. Soft footsteps. A call button. A distant voice giving instructions about medication. She did not think about strategy. She did not think about what came next. She simply sat inside the truth of what she now knew without moving, the way you sometimes have to stop moving entirely before you can understand where you are. She watched her daughter's heartbeat on the screen. 144, steady, certain, entirely her own. Across the city, Brennan Ashford's phone began receiving alerts. The first was from Warren Cole, his chief financial officer of 14 years. "Brennan, call me when you're free. Something is moving with the Hartwell position." The second was from his personal broker. The third was from his broker again, marked urgent. The fourth was not a message. It was a news alert from a financial wire service. A small item, the kind that registers as minor background noise until the moment it does not. Hartwell Capital announces strategic review of minority holdings, citing governance concerns. Statement attributed to CEO Douglas Hartwell. Brennan read the alert. He read it a second time. He called Warren. Warren said, "The Hartwell shares are moving. Someone is liquidating the minority position and simultaneously." "How much?" Brennan said. Warren told him. A silence of 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time for Brennan Ashford to be silent. He said, "Get me my car." Brennan arrived at Mercy General 23 minutes later. He had used those 23 minutes productively. He had recalibrated. This was a skill he had honed over 15 years of high-pressure rooms. Rapid inventory of a situation, identification of what could still be controlled, construction of an appropriate posture for the room he was about to enter. He had also stopped at the hospital gift shop. The white roses were expensive, long-stemmed, wrapped in substantial cellophane with a tasteful bow, the kind of arrangement that communicated both remorse and the ease with which remorse could be expressed. He rode the elevator to the 4th floor with the roses in his left hand and his phone in his right, reading Warren's latest update on the Hartwell position. He put the phone in his pocket when the doors opened. He walked the corridor with the settled, purposeful stride of a man who owns whatever room he is about to enter. He did not expect to find Arthur Kane in room 412. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at Arthur, standing by the window with a leather briefcase, at Douglas, in the chair beside Claire's bed, at Claire herself, sitting upright with her hands folded over her belly and an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not in 4 years of marriage. He looked at the roses in his own hand. He came in. He set the roses on the window ledge. He positioned himself at the foot of the bed, standing, because sitting would have meant accepting the arrangement of the room as given. "Douglas," he said. His voice was warm, concerned, the voice of a man who has arrived at a difficult family moment and intends to help navigate it. "Arthur, I'm glad you're both here. I was going to call you both. Claire and I had a difficult morning. I want to make sure everyone has the full picture before anything. What exactly is there to understand?" Arthur said. He did not look up from the document in his hand. Brennan's jaw tightened a fraction. "Claire has been under significant stress, the bed rest, the pregnancy, the complications. It's been difficult for both of us. We had a disagreement that escalated in a way that I keep us." "Brennan," Claire's voice. Quiet, level, without apology, without qualification. He looked at her. She said, "There's a security camera in the hallway." The silence after that had a specific texture, dense and without give. Brennan looked at the small window set into the hospital room door. He had been in this room many times in the past 3 days. He had never, in those times, thought about the angle of the hallway security camera in relation to that window. He was thinking about it now. She watched him work through the calculation. She had always understood how fast his mind moved. She had once found this quality compelling, that velocity of processing. She watched him arrive at his assessment. What was salvageable, what was not, and what elements could still be shaped. "Claire," he said. His voice dropped to the private register, the one he had used across kitchen tables and in the dark of their bedroom, and in all the spaces he had curated for just the two of them. The voice she had once believed was intimacy. "Whatever you think happened this morning, I am not doing this," she said. He stopped. "Not today," she said, "not anymore." 4 years of marriage, and she had never said those words in that combination. They cost her something real to say. And in the moment after she said them, she felt something return. Small? Certain. Hers. Douglas stood up. He was not the tallest man in the room. He did not need to be. What he had was the quality of complete attention. When Douglas Hartwell focused on something, it knew it was being focused on. "Here is what is going to happen," Douglas said, the voice he used in rooms where significant things were about to change hands. "Arthur has filed a protective order application this afternoon. The hospital incident report is documented. You will leave this room. You will not contact Claire by any means, direct or indirect. All communication will be routed through Arthur's office." Brennan said. That is not. Additionally, Douglas continued, as if Brennan had not spoken, Hartwell Capital is calling its note on Ashford Group's line of credit. The full amount, 30 days. Formal notice will arrive at your offices by end of business today. Something moved through Brennan's face. Not panic. Brennan Ashford did not panic, but a recalibration at a deeper level than the first one. A recalibration that reached further back into the foundations. The note. The morality clause his attorneys had called boilerplate. The clause that had seemed 7 years ago like a small theoretical risk in exchange for substantial capital from his future father-in-law, a gesture of trust and family investment. He understood now what it had actually been, a very long leash held by a very patient man. You can't, Brennan said. The terms don't allow for unilateral... The terms, Arthur said, and now he looked up, include a morality clause requiring conduct that does not detract from the creditworthiness or public standing of the borrowing entity. A chief executive officer striking his pregnant wife in a hospital room, recorded on security camera, and the resulting incident report filed with the State Department of Public Health. Our legal team is prepared to argue this constitutes conduct detrimental to public standing. A pause. They are confident in that argument, Arthur said. Brennan looked at Claire. She met his gaze. She was not triumphant. She was not grieving. She was something quieter and more durable than either of those. She was watching him, the way you watch a storm from inside a house you know is solid, fully aware of its power, no longer afraid of it. I deserved better than this, she thought, out loud, inside herself, for the first time. I deserved so much better than this. From the very beginning. You are going to regret this, Brennan said. She said, I already have enough regrets. This will not be one of them. He left. The door closed behind him. The white roses sat on the window ledge. Nobody moved them. Nobody touched them. They stood in their cellophane in the late afternoon light, expensive and unopened, and slowly, already, beginning to die. Margot came back through the door 20 seconds later. She had been in the hallway the entire time. She set 2 cups of tea on the bedside table and looked at the roses and at Claire and at Douglas and said, in the careful voice of someone who has been waiting a very long time to ask, so, are we doing this? Claire looked at her father, at Arthur, now on his phone in the corner, at Margot. She said, we're doing this. And for the first time since Tabgam Tio, 17 in the afternoon, she felt something other than shock. Something small and warm and located somewhere in the actual center of her, moving the way her daughter moved, from the inside, entirely her own. Margot handed her the tea. It was slightly too hot and had too much sugar. Claire did not mention this. She held the cup in both hands and let the warmth come through. In the parking structure across the street, Warren Cole was already on the phone. Brennan, he said, Meridian Fund is following the Hartwell position, and Castlewood just initiated a review of their holdings. This is moving faster than... Hold the Delacroix closing, Brennan said. The Delacroix partners are already seeing the wire reports. They're going to want... Hold it, Warren. A silence. All right, Warren said. He ended the call. He sat in his car in the parking structure and stared at the concrete wall and thought about 14 years, about all the things he had seen and decided were not his place to address. He put the car in drive. He had a war room to get to. Douglas Hartwell did not operate through emotion. He operated through architecture. He had built Hartwell Capital over 22 years through 2 principles: accurate assessment of what something was actually worth, and the patience to wait until the moment when that assessment could be applied most effectively. He was willing to wait longer than anyone expected and to move faster than anyone anticipated. And the gap between those two qualities was where his advantage lived. By the time Brennan's car reached Ashford Group headquarters, Hartwell Capital had already issued its formal statement to 3 financial wire services. The statement cited governance irregularities and material breach of lending covenants. 3 of Douglas's attorneys had worked on it for the preceding 2 hours in a conference room at Hartwell Capital's offices. It was precise. It was legal. It said nothing about the hospital. It did not need to. The story found its own way into the world. Dorothy Merritt's incident report was hospital property. Incident reports involving physical altercations with vulnerable patients were subject to State Department of Public Health review. The review notification was public record. A reporter on the health desk of the Boston Herald noticed it at 3:17 in the afternoon. She was thorough. She made 4 phone calls. She confirmed 3 facts and attributed everything else to public documents. 700 words. Careful. Specific. By 5 in the afternoon, it was online. By 6, it had been picked up by 2 national financial publications. By 7, it had 14,000 search results. Brennan's communications team released a statement at 6:45. This is a private family matter, being grossly mischaracterized by outlets operating with incomplete information. The statement was widely quoted. The phrase private family matter, deployed while the family member in question lay in a hospital bed under blood pressure monitoring, did not land the way the communications team had intended. By 9 that evening, the story had 60,000 search results. Claire was discharged at 4:30. Her blood pressure had stabilized significantly. Dr. Odom reviewed the final monitoring strip, compared it to the readings from the past 72 hours, and attributed the improvement, in the careful, neutral language of official documentation, to the removal of a significant stressor from the patient's environment. She stood at the door of room 412 and took Claire's hand. "I'll be here," she said. "For whatever you need, anytime." Claire held her hand for a moment. She wanted to say something that would be adequate. She could not locate the words. She nodded instead. Dr. Odom understood. Douglas drove her to the Hartwell house in Brookline, the house she had grown up in. She could see it as they turned onto the street. The deep green front door, the garden her mother had tended for 30 years, the kitchen light already on in the early dark. She sat in the passenger seat of her father's car, in the driveway, for 4 minutes after he turned off the engine. She could not go in yet, not because she was not safe, not because she did not want to, but because the house was before, and once she walked through that door, it would become after. She needed 4 more minutes in the space between. Douglas sat with her. He did not speak. He did not look at his watch. He sat with her in the dark of the driveway, the way he had sat with her through difficult things her entire life. Simply present, simply there. After 4 minutes, she opened the door. Lena Hartwell met them in the entryway. 58 years old, gray hair cut short. The expression of a woman who had spent 33 years of marriage to Douglas Hartwell developing the ability to read a situation completely and immediately. She took one look at her daughter and opened her arms. A complete embrace. Both arms. No words. She smelled like rosemary and warm laundry, and something underneath was some of those things that had no name but had always meant safety. Claire put her face against her mother's shoulder and came completely undone. Not dramatically, not loudly. The quiet kind of falling apart that happens when you have been holding something together through sheer architecture of will and you finally reach the place where you do not have to anymore. Lena held her. She did not speak. She did not rush. She did not say it was going to be okay. She was too intelligent and too honest to make promises about the future when her daughter needed help surviving the present. She held her. When it was over, they went to the kitchen. Lena made coffee. The kitchen smelled like the kitchen had always smelled. The green walls, the garden visible through the window in the gathering dark, a plate of crackers and cheese on the table. The simple thing Lena always produced when someone in her family needed something to do with their hands. They sat. They did not talk about Brennan. They did not talk about strategy or legal filings or stock movements. Lena told a story about the neighbor's retriever that had gotten into her herb garden that morning and eaten most of the parsley. Claire almost laughed. It was close enough. Across the city, Ashford Group's war room was not going well. Warren Cole was present, 3 senior vice presidents, the communications director and her 2 assistants, Brennan's personal attorney, Henry Blackwood, on speakerphone from his home office. The mood was not panic. Brennan did not allow panic in his rooms, but there was a quality to it, the specific tension of experienced professionals who understood exactly how bad a situation could become and were running the numbers in real time. The Hartwell note, called at 30 days, was not company ending on its own. Ashford Group had sufficient liquidity. With aggressive management, it could be refinanced. What could not be easily managed was what came with it. Because Hartwell Capital did not move without reason. This was understood in the market. When Douglas Hartwell cited governance concerns and pulled a position, other investors began to ask questions. Not because they panicked, because they were professionals who understood that Douglas Hartwell's judgment had been accurate for 22 years. Questions became calls. Calls became formal position reviews. Position reviews became announcements. By 9 that evening, Meridian Fund and Castlewood Partners had both announced formal reviews of their Ashford Group holdings. By 10, the stock had dropped 11% in after-hours trading. Warren Cole stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the war room and looked at the city lights and thought about 14 years. About all the things he had witnessed in those years, about the dinners where Brennan had redirected conversations away from Claire, about the meetings where Brennan had taken credit for analyses she had prepared, about the small, consistent, unremarkable accumulation of a man making someone else smaller, about all the times Warren had decided it was not his place. He turned from the window. He said, in the war room, in front of 14 people, in the flat voice of a man who has decided that having a place is less important than saying a true thing. Brennan, this is not recoverable through communication strategy. You need to consider what it is you actually did today. The room went completely still. Brennan looked at Warren. The look was long and specific, and calibrated to communicate something that did not require words. He said, "You're off the Delacroix account." Warren picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He picked up his laptop case. He looked at Brennan one final time with the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just set it down. "All right," he said. He walked out. The door closed. Nobody in the room spoke. Brennan turned back to the whiteboard, where the communications strategy was outlined in blue marker. He uncapped the marker. He added a line. "Continue," he said. His hand was steady. His voice was steady. Only the line on the whiteboard was slightly wrong, angled down where he had intended it to go straight. But nobody in the room mentioned this, because nobody in the room was going to be the next person to say a true thing tonight. In a South End apartment, a woman named Vivian Cross sat on her sofa with her phone in her lap. She was 34 years old. She had been, or had believed herself to be, the tense felt complicated now, sitting here with the news story open on her phone. Brennan Ashford's girlfriend for 14 months. She had known he was married when they met. He had told her on their third date, in a tone so matter-of-fact, It had almost worked, that the marriage was over and everything but paperwork, that they had been living separate lives for years, that it was simply a matter of timing and legal process. She had believed him. She had believed a lot of things. She read the story about the hospital again, the 700 factual words, the incident report, the security camera, the blood pressure reading of a pregnant woman alone in a room with a man who hit her and walked out adjusting his cufflinks. She set the phone down on the cushion beside her. She sat with what she knew and what it meant. She thought about the text messages, the emails she had seen on his phone when he left it open on her kitchen counter, the 3 phone calls she had recorded on her own phone, not for any particular strategic reason, but because something in her had needed documentation, some quiet part of herself insisting on a record even when the rest of her was not ready to look at it. She sat with all of this for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. She searched for Arthur Kane's office number. The attorney she had seen mentioned in a financial publication last year in connection with Hartwell Capital. She found it. She stared at the number for 3 minutes. Then she called. Arthur Kane's office received the call at 9:47 that evening. Arthur was still at his desk, because Arthur Kane was always still at his desk when a case required it. He listened. He asked 2 questions. He thanked Vivian Cross and told her that he would be in contact the following morning. Then he called Douglas. Douglas called Claire. Claire was in the guest room of the Hartwell house, the one that had been hers all through high school. The same blue curtains her mother had never replaced, which Claire had once found mortifying and now found entirely reassuring. She had slept, genuinely, deeply slept, from 11 until 7. She had expected to lie awake all night with the noise of her own thoughts. Instead, her body had claimed sleep like a survival mechanism, like a wise animal, finding shelter before a storm. She was sitting in the chair by the window when her father called. The garden was full of morning light. Her mother was below, moving among the lavender beds with garden clippers, working with the focused satisfaction of someone caring for something that was coming back to life. Vivian Cross called Arthur last night, Douglas said. Claire absorbed this. What does she want? Claire said. To help. A longer pause. Tell me, she said. Here's what Vivian Cross had. 14 months of evidence assembled without any intention of its becoming evidence. Text messages in which Brennan outlined plans to restructure Ashford Group's share distribution before the baby was born, changes that would have eliminated Claire's indirect, beneficial interest. Emails between Brennan and his personal attorney, dated 8 months before the prenuptial amendment, was presented to Claire, discussing the specific language of that amendment and its intended financial effect on Claire's position. And 3 phone calls, recorded in Virginia where one-party consent applied, in which Brennan discussed his intention to pursue sole custody of the child after separation, on the grounds, as he put it, of the mother's emotional instability. He had been planning this for longer than 2 years. He had been planning it before the baby was conceived. Arthur read Claire the summary. He read it carefully and completely, without editorial comment, because he understood that what she needed was the information in its plainest form. When he finished, she was quiet. She looked at the lavender in the garden below, her mother's careful hands among the purple-gray stalks, coming back after the winter. Still sparse, still tentative, coming back. Then she said, "Is she all right, Vivian?" Arthur said, "She seems, yes." She said she didn't know about you at the beginning. When she found out, he told her the marriage had been over for years, that he was waiting for the right moment to finalize things. He would say that, Claire said. She also said... Arthur paused. She wanted me to tell you that she's sorry. She asked me to convey that specifically. Claire was quiet for a moment. The lavender, the morning light, her mother's hands. Tell her I heard her, Claire said. And tell her thank you. She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the blue-curtained room with the morning coming through the glass. She let herself feel the full strangeness of it, that the person who had most directly wronged her had become, entirely of her own choosing, someone who wanted to help, that grace could arrive from directions you had not prepared for. She went downstairs. The kitchen smelled like coffee and her mother's presence. She sat at the table. Outside the window, the garden was brightening. The lavender, the parsley, still recovering from the neighbor's dog, making its patient way back. She thought about what she wanted. Not strategically, just plainly. What she actually wanted, the way a person wants things, when they have finally stopped managing their own desires into acceptable shapes. She wanted her daughter to be safe. She wanted her daughter to know, from the very beginning, what safe felt like in a room. She wanted pale green walls in the baby's room. She wanted Margot's voice on the phone. She wanted Sunday dinners with her parents and coffee that was reliably good, and the sound of the city outside a window that was hers. She wanted to find the version of herself who had existed before Brennan, the one who had opinions about real estate and said them out loud and did not immediately look around the table to see if they had been welcome. She thought that version was still there. She thought she had been very quiet for a long time. She thought she was ready to be loud again. She drank her coffee. That afternoon, Brennan violated the protective order. He called her cell phone at 11:14. She watched it ring and did not answer. He called again at 11:19. She silenced the call. At 11:22, he sent a text. We need to talk. Not through lawyers, just us. Please. She took a screenshot. She sent it to Arthur. Then she put the phone face down on the table and went out to the garden to find her mother. Arthur called 40 minutes later. His voice had a particular quality she was learning to recognize. The quality of someone who has just been handed something they know how to use. He just gave us something, Arthur said. And then, for the first time since this had begun, Claire, we're in a very strong position. She noticed the word we. She filed it. She said, tell me what comes next. Tomorrow, Arthur said, I meet with the board's independent counsel. 3 days after the hospital, Ashford Group's board of directors convened an emergency session. Brennan arrived at 7:58 for an 8 o'clock meeting. He arrived the way he always arrived to important rooms, slightly early, immaculately dressed, projecting certainty with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his entire adult life being the most prepared person in any given space. He carried his leather portfolio. He wore the dark charcoal suit, the one reserved for rooms where outcomes needed to be shaped. He had slept 4 hours and looked as if he had slept 8. He came through the boardroom door and stopped. The composition of the room was not what he expected. 3 independent board members he had considered reliably in his corner were seated on the far side of the table, away from their usual positions. They were seated beside 2 members he had never considered allies. This new arrangement had a geometry, a specific, unmistakable geometry that an experienced board veteran would recognize in the first 3 seconds of reading the room. It was the geometry of a decision that had already been made, a meeting called not to deliberate, but to formalize. Brennan Ashford was a very experienced board veteran. Richard, he said to the board chair, what is this? Richard Paulson was 71 years old. He had chaired boards across 4 industries over 40 years. His expression had the particular flatness of a man who had been in enough difficult rooms to have stopped finding them dramatic. "This is your board, Brennan," he said. "Please sit down." The meeting lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. Brennan spoke for much of the first hour. He was articulate, composed, and precise. He had prepared. He presented his perspective on the media coverage as opportunistic and operating on incomplete information. He characterized the Hartwell action as a personal grievance by a family member operating under emotional duress rather than legitimate governance concerns. He argued that a paid leave would signal weakness to a market already operating on imperfect data. The board listened. The independent members asked questions. Their questions were specific. They referenced documents, the incident report, the security camera footage, which the hospital had provided to their legal team under subpoena, the timeline of the prenuptial amendment, the life insurance beneficiary change, the communications strategy documents from the evening of the initial news story. They had all of this. Brennan understood, partway through the second hour, that this material had not been assembled quickly. It had been assembled carefully by people who understood what they were looking for and had been given the resources to find it. He understood who had provided those resources. At the end of the 2 hours and 17 minutes, the board voted 7-2, mandatory paid leave, 30 days, pending a complete governance review and forensic audit of internal financial transactions to be conducted by an independent firm. Warren Cole appointed interim chief executive officer, effective immediately. The announcement drafted by the board's legal team, reviewed by outside counsel, to be released to wire services at 4:15 that afternoon. Brennan walked out of the boardroom at 4:23. He walked through the office, through 23 floors of a company he had built, past the assistants who found reasons to look at their screens, past the analysts who studied their monitors with concentrated focus, past the senior vice presidents who managed, with varying degrees of success, not to be the one who made eye contact. He walked to the elevator. He rode down. He walked through the lobby and through the glass doors and out onto the sidewalk. 2 photographers from financial publications were positioned on the sidewalk. They did not pursue him. They documented. His hand going to his face, his car arriving slightly too quickly, the small, undignified hurry of a man who had spent his entire career controlling how he was seen, exiting a building where he would never again be the most important person in the room. Claire did not watch any of this. She was on the floor of the guest bedroom of her parents' house, assembling a crib. It had arrived that morning, ordered by Lena, who had taken Claire to a baby furniture store in Newton 2 days earlier on the grounds that forward motion is the best medicine for standing still. The crib was pale wood with clean lines and curved side rails. The instructions were 28 pages long and included a step that appeared to have been written for a different piece of furniture in a different country. Margot was helping. Margot's help consisted of sitting cross-legged on the floor, reading the instructions aloud in progressively more elaborate voices, a news anchor, then a nature documentary narrator, then what she described as a very tired Scandinavian furniture designer, and handing Claire tools at the wrong moments and saying, "I'm pretty confident that's upside down," about things that were definitively right side up. But she was there, and she was making Claire laugh. Not the careful, performed laugh of dinner parties and business events, the real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere in the actual middle of you and surprises you when it arrives. It was the most ordinary thing that had happened in 5 days. It was the best thing that had happened in 5 days. By 5:30, they were done. The crib stood in the corner of the room by the window. Pale wood in the late afternoon light. One side rail sat a millimeter lower than the other, a consequence of the baffling Step 14, which neither of them had fully decoded. But it stood. It held. It was ready. Margot stood back and looked at it with her hands on her hips. "We built that," she said, with the genuine satisfaction of someone who has accomplished something difficult. "You handed me the wrong screwdriver 4 times, Claire said. "I was providing emotional support in screwdriver form. It's a different skill set." Claire looked at the crib, at the pale wood and the curved sides and the slight imperfection in the lower rail. The baby moved, a firm, deliberate push against her ribs. The movement that meant her daughter was awake and paying attention and had opinions about her current situation. Claire put her hand flat on her belly. Something happened in her face. Something that had been wound very tight for a very long time began, almost imperceptibly, to ease. Margot saw it. She did not comment on it. She reached over and put her arm around Claire's shoulders, and they stood together in front of the crib in the late afternoon light and just looked at it, the thing they had built, the thing that was ready. Douglas came to the doorway a while later. He stood there, looking at the room, at the crib in the corner, at the late light catching the pale wood. He was quiet for a moment, with the particular quality of a person absorbing something they did not expect to feel so strongly. "What are you going to name her?" he said. The list on Claire's phone was gone. She had deleted it 2 days ago. Every name on it had been chosen in a different life by a different version of herself. She looked at the crib. "Elena," she said, "after Mom. Her middle name will be Elena." Douglas made a sound. Not a sob, nothing as large as that. Something smaller and more complete. He nodded once. He looked at the crib for another moment. "She'll like that," he said. His voice was careful. "Even. Very much." That night, Claire lay awake in the blue-curtained room at 2 in the morning. Not from anxiety, not from crisis. From the particular wakefulness of someone who is almost at the edge of something, who can feel the approach of it without being able to see its shape yet. She thought about the monitor in room 412, 144, 144. She thought about the document with her signature on page 7. She thought about Brennan, walking out and adjusting his cufflinks, and she thought about 4 years of making herself smaller and quieter and more careful, and she thought about the dinner party where she had stopped talking about real estate. She thought, "I was so afraid of who I was becoming in that marriage. I was afraid that if I stayed much longer, I would disappear entirely, that there would be nothing left that was actually mine." Then the other thought, the one that was arriving more steadily now, more certain each time it came. "But I became this instead." She put her hand on her belly. Her daughter shifted under her palm. Awake at 2 in the morning, apparently, was a trait they shared. She breathed. She stayed. The prenuptial amendment was challenged in family court 3 weeks after the hospital. Arthur had built the case with the methodical care he brought to everything. The notarization irregularities were the foundation. The notary public who had executed Claire's signature was employed by Brennan's personal attorney's office. Independent notarization, by definition, required independence. The claim that Claire's own attorney had reviewed and approved the revisions was contradicted by that attorney's records, her calendar, her emails, and her sworn statement that she had never been contacted regarding any amendment. The misrepresentation of the document's nature, described to a woman in her first trimester, severely ill, as a routine insurance update, was documented in texts between Brennan and his attorney discussing how to present the document to Claire so that she would not feel the need to read it carefully. Brennan's legal team was excellent. 3 senior partners, a support team of 4, rates that could fund a small nonprofit. Arthur was better. The amendment was suspended pending full evidentiary review. Claire's claims reverted to the original prenuptial terms. The original terms were, it turned out, quite generous. Written by her own attorney 4 years ago in good faith by someone who had believed the marriage was going to be one. The board's governance review ran concurrently. It produced findings that were, in the precise language, of corporate investigation concerning. The forensic audit identified irregularities in several internal financial transactions. Brennan's paid leave was extended. A negotiation began. Quiet, extended, conducted through multiple layers of representation. On one side, Brennan's personal attorneys and the firm he had retained to manage the board dispute. On the other, the board's independent counsel and, at a remove, Arthur Kane. The negotiation resolved after 11 days. Brennan's resignation from Ashford Group, effective immediately. A separation package that was considerably smaller than he had imagined. A non-disparagement clause covering all parties. Warren Cole appointed permanent chief executive officer contingent on board ratification. Warren Cole called Claire personally to tell her. He was brief and professional. Before ending the call, he said, "I should have said something sooner. There were things I saw over 14 years that I should have addressed. I didn't. I'm sorry for that." Claire said, "You said something when it mattered. You walked out when it mattered." A pause. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "I mean it," she said, and she did. The Hartwell Capital note was managed. Refinanced through a different institution. Ashford Group stabilized under Warren's leadership. Douglas reclaimed his capital position intact. He never spoke publicly about any aspect of it. He did not need to. Claire found an apartment in Beacon Hill. She found it with Margot on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, walking streets she had not walked since her marriage. She had forgotten, somewhere in 4 years, of the penthouse and Brennan's preferences and the careful navigation of his spaces, that she had always loved this neighborhood. The brick buildings and the uneven sidewalks and the way the afternoon light fell in the late fall. The apartment was a floor-through on the 3rd floor of a building on Acorn Street. High ceilings, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that got morning light, a view from the living room window that was not impressive by any conventional measure, a courtyard, some trees, the backs of other buildings, but was hers. She signed the lease. She painted the living room a color called morning dew. It was a pale, specific green. Her mother stood in the doorway of the half-painted room on the Saturday morning Claire was working on it and said, "That's almost exactly the color of your bedroom at home, when you were growing up." Claire looked at the wall. "Is it?" she said. "Almost exactly," Lena said. Neither of them said anything else about it. Some things did not require comment. Some things were simply true and simply right and required only being seen. She set the crib up in the 2nd bedroom, the slightly imperfect one, with the millimeter difference in the lower rail. She had considered taking it apart and redoing step 14 and decided against it. It had stood under assembly and it would stand under its purpose. She had decided, as a general principle, to stop apologizing for things that were almost right. She bought a chair for the corner of the room, a pale gray rocker with a curved back. She positioned it by the window where the morning light would come in. She sat in it for the first time on a Wednesday evening, alone in the apartment, and looked at the room she had built. The crib, the chair, the pale green walls of the other room visible through the doorway. The city sounds from outside. She thought, "I built this. This is mine." It was not the largest thought. It was not dramatic or triumphant. It was a simple and complete and entirely adequate thought, and she held it in both hands, like the cup of coffee in her mother's kitchen, and she let it be enough. She started therapy on a Thursday. Dr. Carol Whitmore was in her mid-40s, direct and occasionally dry, with the specific quality of patience that comes from spending many years with people in the middle of difficult things. She did not make Claire feel like a homework assignment. She did not perform empathy. She listened and asked questions and occasionally said things that required a week of thought. In their second session, she said, "You know what I notice? You never stopped being competent. You just stopped believing anyone wanted you to be." Claire thought about that sentence for 8 days. She thought about the dinner party, about going silent over her own expertise, about the 4 years of careful, performed smallness. She thought, I knew things. I always knew things. I just stopped saying them out loud. In their fourth session, she said, I want to find the version of me that existed before him. She was certain about things. She had opinions and said them. Dr. Whitmore said, Where do you think she went? Claire said, She got very quiet, but I don't think she left. Dr. Whitmore said, No, I don't think she did either. Vivianan Cross sent a letter, handwritten. 3 pages, careful and honest. Claire read it once, completely, at her kitchen table on a Sunday morning with her coffee. When she finished, she folded it and put it in the drawer of her nightstand. She did not read it again, but she kept it. Some things are for keeping even before you fully understand why. On the phone with Margot one evening in November, Claire said, You know what I keep thinking about? I keep thinking about who I was before him. She was so certain. She had strong opinions about everything and just said them out loud without checking whether they were welcome. Margot said, What happened to her? She got very quiet, Claire said. I kept making her quieter because it was easier, and I told myself it was compromise. I told myself I was being a good partner. A pause. I'm going to find her, Claire said. I think she's been there the whole time, just waiting. Margot said, She never left. She was just being very, very quiet, waiting for you to stop asking permission to exist. Claire said, Yeah. A long pause on the line, the comfortable kind. Yeah, she said again. On a Tuesday morning in April, at 6:12 in the morning, Claire Whitfield gave birth to a daughter. The labor was 13 hours. Lena was in the room throughout. She had been the kind of presence that required no management. She handed things at the right moments, said quiet things at the right moments, put her hand on Claire's back during the hardest of it, and simply stayed. She had done this before, in other rooms, for other people she loved, and she understood that staying was sometimes the entire job. Margot had arrived at the hospital at 9 the previous evening. She had come equipped with a tote bag containing 2 kinds of crackers, chamomile tea, and regular tea in case preferences changed. A paperback novel she would not open, but whose presence she found morally supportive, and a small stuffed rabbit purchased from the hospital gift shop downstairs. She described the rabbit as being for the baby, but also for herself, emotionally, which Claire understood completely. She sat in the waiting area and sent text messages. They ranged from genuinely supportive to deeply unhinged and covered all necessary bases. Douglas paced the hallway. He paced with the energy of a man who is accustomed to controlling outcomes and countering an outcome that could not be controlled, which is to say, he paced with great conviction and no measurable effect, back and forth on the maternity floor linoleum for 13 hours, and the nurses learned his circuit and stepped around it without comment and brought him coffee twice without being asked, which he received with the slightly surprised gratitude of a man not accustomed to being taken care of. Brennan was not there. Claire had known he would not be. The protective order was still in effect. The legal proceedings were ongoing. There were practical and legal reasons for his absence. The emotional reality was simpler. Lying in the delivery room at 4 in the morning, in the particular clarity that sometimes arrives in the middle of the hardest physical experiences, she thought, "There is no one in this room performing. There is no one I need to manage. There is no one I have to become smaller for." There was just the work, and the people who loved her. And then, a cry. High, clear, astonished, as if Elena herself could not believe the audacity of this. As if she had arrived in the world and found it immediately surprising, and was registering this surprise at full and honest volume. Lena laughed. Full and complete and immediate. The laugh of a woman who has waited a long time for a particular sound and has finally heard it, and who, in the next instant, was crying, openly and without apology, in the delivery room. The tears of someone who has been holding hope for a long time and has just been given permission to put it down. Lena Hartwell cried in that room and did not apologize for it, and it was one of the most beautiful things Claire had ever seen. Douglas was brought in. He stood at the side of the bed. He looked at his granddaughter, very small, very red, entirely unimpressed by her recent transition from interior to exterior existence, which she was making known through ongoing vocal commentary. His face did something Claire had never, in 61 years of knowing him, seen it do. Every part of it opened, all the architecture of decades. The professional composure, the calibrated management of what to show and when to show it, the careful construction of how Douglas Hartwell appeared to the world, all of it dropped away, completely and instantly. He was just a man looking at a child, which is perhaps the oldest and most uncomplicated thing. He said, "Hello, Elena." Elena did not respond. She had things to say, and they were not yet words, but they were emphatically said. She had arrived in the world with strong opinions, and she intended to express them. Douglas sat down of the chair beside the bed and held his daughter's hand and looked at his granddaughter, and his face stayed open, and nothing about this required managing. In the months that followed, Claire rebuilt, not in a single gesture, not dramatically, in the slow, accumulative way that actual life works. Incrementally, imperfectly, with setbacks distributed at inconvenient intervals and breakthroughs that arrived without announcement and did not always look, at first, like breakthroughs. She returned to work in February, when Elena was 4 months old, not to Ashford Group, to a consultancy she launched with 2 colleagues from her pre-Brennan career. Women she had drifted from during the years of her marriage, the drift so gradual she had not noticed it was happening until she was already far from shore. When she called them, both of them, with the slightly tentative energy of someone who is not sure what they will find, they were there, immediately, without requiring the drift to be explained. The consultancy's first year was good. The second year was better. She went to therapy every Thursday. She found over months that she was bringing different things to Dr. Whitmore. Not the acute things, the documentation and the grief and the reckonings, the quieter things, who she was becoming, what she wanted the next 10 years to look like, the version of herself she was rebuilding, which was not entirely the same as the version that had existed before. Because you cannot move through something like this and come out the other side unchanged, and she had stopped trying to. She was not entirely the person she had been before Brennan. She was someone who had been through something. She was someone who had learned things she would not have chosen to learn. She was someone with edges that had been made by experience rather than intention. She was, she thought, on a Thursday afternoon in Dr. Whitmore's quiet office, more entirely herself than she had ever been. She did not date. Not that year. Not yet. She understood that not yet was a timing word and not a permanent state, and she did not confuse the two. The Beacon Hill apartment became, over months, entirely hers in the way that only time can make a space yours. She knew which window caught the morning light and which one got the afternoon. She knew that the coffee was reliably good if you let it bloom for 40 seconds before pressing. She knew that Elena, in her slightly imperfect crib, slept best with the white noise machine on the low setting and the hallway light left on in a crack under the door. She knew these things the way you know the things that are actually, genuinely, completely yours. Douglas and Lena came for Sunday dinners. These became, over months, the rhythm by which she measured the week. The green walls of her parents' kitchen and her mother's cooking, and Douglas in the chair by the window, holding Elena in a way that suggested he had been doing this for decades, rather than months. Elena knew his voice early, the way infants know the things that have been consistently warm and present. She would turn toward the sound of him when he came through the door, toward the particular frequency of Douglas Hartwell's voice saying her name. He mentioned this only once, and only quietly, and only to Lena, sitting in the kitchen after Claire had gone home on a Sunday evening. "She knows my voice," Lena said. "Of course she does." He did not say anything else about it. He simply received it. The way you receive the things that arrive, finally, after a very long wait. On a Thursday morning in December, 8 months after the hospital, Claire Whitfield sat at the kitchen table in her Beacon Hill apartment and drank coffee. That was exactly right. Elena was in the wooden high chair. Slightly imperfect, purchased specifically because it reminded her of the crib, because she had made a decision sometime in the fall about things that were almost right, and was examining a piece of banana with the focused concentration of a scientist conducting research of significant importance. The morning light came through the kitchen window in a particular way. It came in at an angle that caught the pale green of the living room wall through the doorway and made it glow very slightly. It was a good light. It was a light she had learned to recognize and to be grateful for in the simple, daily way of someone who has decided to notice good things when they come. Her phone was on the table. She did not check it. She had not checked it in the first 15 minutes of being awake, which was something she had not been able to say for most of 4 years. She had not checked it 3 times, lock and unlock, searching for messages from a man who calibrated how much contact to give her based on what level of uncertainty kept her most compliant. She had not checked it at all. It sat on the table, face down, and she let it stay there. Elena looked up from the banana. She looked at her mother. She had her grandmother's eyes, which were Lena Hartwell's eyes, which were the light gray of early morning before the full color comes. She had Claire's mouth, which was to say she had an expressive mouth and opinions she wanted to express with it. She put the banana piece back on the tray. She reached out her small hand. She put it flat against Claire's cheek. Gently, the way small hands touch things that matter. With curiosity and complete honesty and no performance. The way someone who has not yet learned that the world expects you to want things quietly touches the face of the person who is, so far, her entire world. Claire closed her eyes. She felt the small, warm weight of her daughter's hand against her face. The same cheek, the same face, that had been touched once in violence and was being touched now in love. And she understood, with her eyes closed in the morning light, that this was what healing actually looked like. Not the dramatic moment, not the triumph in the boardroom, or the judgment from the bench, or the stock ticker going the right direction. This ordinary, entirely sufficient morning. She thought about room 412, the heart monitor counting 144 while her husband adjusted his cufflinks. The cold shock of it, her hand going slowly to her face. She thought about the parked car in the driveway. The 4 minutes she had needed before she could go inside to the place that was safe. The distance between who she had been walking out of that hospital and who she was sitting here now. She thought about the prenuptial document and the 2 years of planning and the careful, systematic dismantling of her financial standing by a man she had trusted with everything. She thought about assembling the crib on the floor with Margot, reading instructions in theatrical voices. She thought about the 3 in the morning of waiting, sitting in the chair by the not quite perfect crib in the pale green room. She thought about Dr. Whitmore saying you never stopped being competent. You just stopped believing anyone wanted you to be. And the 8 days she had spent turning that sentence over. She thought about her mother's arms in the doorway. She thought about her father walking through a hospital corridor, already walking before she had finished the sentence. She thought the prison door had been unlocked the whole time. She thought, I just needed one terrible morning in a hospital room to finally believe I could walk through it. Elena pressed her palm more firmly against her mother's cheek. Insistent, present, entirely here. Claire opened her eyes. Her daughter was looking at her with those early morning gray eyes, direct and curious, and entirely without apology for demanding to be seen. Claire smiled. It was not the careful, performed smile of dinner parties and strategy meetings and the long management of another person's moods. It was the other kind, the kind that starts from somewhere you cannot locate and arrives on your face without asking permission. Elena, apparently satisfied with this result, returned her attention to the banana. Claire picked up her coffee. Outside the window, the city was beginning its morning. The particular sounds of it layering together, traffic and pigeons and the distant ordinary noise of people going to the places they needed to go. The sounds of a world that did not require her permission or her performance or her smallness. A world that was simply proceeding and had left a space in it for her. She sat with her coffee and her daughter in the morning light. She thought about Margot, who would call at some point today because Margot called every other day with the reliability of a person who understood that showing up consistently was not a grand gesture, but a practice. She thought about Sunday dinner at her parents' house and Douglas in the chair by the window in her mother's garden, coming back every spring with the reliable insistence of things that know how to return from the cold. She thought about the consultancy and the meeting she had Thursday afternoon and the proposal she had drafted Tuesday evening after Elena went to sleep, sitting at the kitchen table with the city quiet outside, her own expertise in her own hands, saying what she knew out loud to a blank document without checking whether it was welcome. She thought, I found her, the version of herself she had been looking for, the certain one, the one with opinions, the one who said things out loud. She was not entirely the same as the version that had existed before. She was something that had been formed by all of it, by the love she had given genuinely and the trust she had given unwisely, and the 4 years and the hospital and the document on page 7 and the crib and the 3 in the morning and the lavender and the morning dew walls and the coffee that was finally, reliably, exactly right. She was made of all of it, and she was more entirely herself than she had ever been. The baby banged her small fist on the tray of the high chair. This was a recent development. Elena had developed opinions about the pace of banana delivery and was prepared to register them through available means. "I hear you," Claire said. She got up. She cut another piece of banana. She put it on the tray. Elena examined it. Apparently satisfied, she picked it up. The morning continued. The light moved through the window and caught the pale green wall, and everything in the apartment was warm and ordinary and theirs. The coffee cooled to the right temperature. The city went about its business outside the glass. Elena conducted her research into the properties of banana, and Claire Whitfield sat in the kitchen of her life, the one she had built, the one she had chosen, the one she had made from the materials of a very difficult year, and let herself be completely, quietly, entirely present in it. Starting over, she had learned, was not what it looked like from the outside. It did not look like triumph. It did not look like the moment the verdict came down, or the moment the stock dropped, or the moment Brennan walked out of a building he would never run again. It looked like this: coffee and morning light and a daughter, with her grandmother's eyes, banging her fist on a wooden tray with the full-bodied confidence of someone who has never been told to want things quietly. It looked like staying. It looked like being here, in this ordinary morning, entirely yourself, with nothing you need to perform, and no one you need to manage, and no smaller version of yourself required. It looked like this, just like this. Closing disclaimer: this content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team with the sole purpose of delivering meaning, emotional truth, and real-world lessons to our audience. Every story is crafted to remind you that your experience is valid, your strength is real, and your story is never over.